Thank you. It is 6:50 PM and the Wednesday, January 17th Performance Committee will now come to order. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Please note that committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors will be held remotely via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. Please visit rtd-denver.com, and a live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. I would now like to call the roll for the committee members. Director Busick. I don't see Director Busick here yet. Director Davidson.
Here.
Director Geisinger is out of town. Director Guzman.
See that he's still logged in, but perhaps he's stepped away.
Okay. Director Rosenthal.
Present.
Thank you. Director Tisdale.
Present.
And I am here. Let's try again to see if we have Director Busick.
Committee Chair Catlin, Director Busick, when we polled for this, indicated he was not available to stick around after the Operations and Safety Committee meeting.
So that means we have two absent.
Correct.
There's Director Guzman.
I am here, sorry.
Okay, so I show that we have Directors Davidson, Guzman, Rosenthal, Tisdale, and myself in attendance. So, and we have two absent. So there are 5 directors present, which is a quorum. Thank you. I'd now like to open public comment to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. During this time, the committee will not offer any direct comments or responses. However, if you would like to be contacted regarding your public comment, please email the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Are there any hands raised for public comment, Mr. Curl?
Committee Chair Catlin, there are no hands raised.
And we have not received any emails.
That's correct.
Okay. So, seeing no participants in the queue, we will now close the public comment period at this time. There is one recommended action on the agenda this evening. The action is for the 6th Amendment to GM CEO Employment Agreement. And it's for the Board of Directors to adopt a 6th Amendment to the employment agreement with General Manager and CEO Deborah A. Johnson to increase her base salary by 1.8% from $395,120 to $402,325, effective retroactively November 9th, 2023, which is consistent with the board adopted GM CEO compensation philosophy and compensation-based salary range that we discussed at the end of 2023. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion.
Director Rosenthal moved. Is there a second?
I'll second Guzman.
Thank you. So we have Directors Rosenthal and Directors Guzman as first and as movement and second. I would like to ask previous committee chair Davidson and current board chair to present this item, and then ask that Charlene Polegi, Chief People Officer, add any pertinent information. Mr. Davidson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Committee Chair Catlin. Appreciate it. Thank you to members of the committee. I'll keep this brief. This is the result of a long time coming project that initiated with a compensation analysis that was conducted pursuant to the general manager and CEO's current agreement. This is the report that we frequently refer to as the Gallagher report, Gallagher being the benefit services vendor that assisted the board with its compensation analysis for the position of general manager and CEO of the agency. I won't go through all of the details that are contained within your packet. I know we have had discussions on this matter, but I will highlight a few things in particular. As I know my colleagues are well aware, the Office of the State Auditor, dating all the way back to 2010, had encouraged this board to develop several things to inform the base salary pay and total compensation of our general manager and CEO. One is the development of a formal compensation philosophy that would become our North Star or our guidepost as to how we establish the base salary and compensation package for the general manager and CEO. As we are all aware, that compensation philosophy that this board had was rather out of date, not readily available, and not really pertinent, and therefore this board, in partnership with Chief People Officer Charlene Pelleggi, developed and adopted a new flexible compensation philosophy mid last year. And certainly we are incredibly grateful to CPO Pelleggi's assistance in that matter. That compensation philosophy called for us to establish a market competitive base salary range for our general manager and CEO. Also, the Office of the State Auditor indicated that it would be best practice for this board to have a base salary range for the position of general manager and CEO. As we will all recall, we were recommended a salary range in the Gallagher report that was conducted for this board of directors and adopted by this board of directors. Ultimately, we aged that salary range because that salary range had aged by a year since we had adopted the report known as the Gallagher report. We used the employment cost index to age that base salary range, and ultimately last year, the Performance Committee adopted a base salary range for the position of general manager and CEO that has a minimum of $292,600 and a maximum of $512,050. Ultimately, the recommendation before you is to remain consistent with our compensation philosophy, is to move our current general manager and CEO, Deborah Johnson, to the midpoint of our adopted base salary range. That would be moving to a base salary of $402,325. This is again consistent with our compensation philosophy as well as our adopted base salary range. It is also applying data and methodology to our range and to our base salary, something that this board was called upon to do many years ago, and I'm proud to say we have made our strides and gotten so done. I'd like to just finish by highlighting that Ms. Johnson's education and more than 30 years of transit sector experience and more than 20 years of experience in senior C-suite leadership certainly justify her position in the midpoint of this range, and I think is highly pertinent as we consider this recommended action. I'll also just remind everybody, as we are well aware, we have many things to do to ensure that we maintain a data-centric and data-informed approach. This certainly is not a final statement of all of the work the Performance Committee needs to do to remain consistent with our compensation philosophy, but certainly is a very important stride in applying data and thoughtfulness to the base salary. So with that, I'll open up for, I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions, our discussion on the matter, and I will yield back to Committee Chair Catlin. Thank you very much for your time, and I'd be remiss in not thanking Ms. Johnson for her incredible patience in this process, given that the compensation analysis was a part of the employment contract she negotiated with this agency. With that, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. I would like to concur with your remarks about Ms. Johnson's incredible patience. We are delinquent in getting this done, and I'm glad to say that we finally have gotten it done. Ms. Pelleggi, do you have anything to add to Chair Davidson's report?
No, not at this time, Chair. Charlene Pelleggi, Chief People Officer. No, not at this time. Director Davidson was very clear and succinct.
I agree. Thank you. I think it's important, since this is a fairly significant ask of this committee, that we get participation from all of our members, followed by participation from board members who are not on the committee. So I'm going to ask each of you in turn, and I apologize for putting you on the spot, to provide some comments, beginning with, you already got Director Davidson's presentation, but I'd like to begin with Director Guzman.
I do not have any comments at this time, so I am happy to yield the floor.
Okay, Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the General Manager and CEO's patience, but I also appreciate her performance. And, coming back from the, really dark times of COVID, the crisis that, still is rippling through today, and other various crises, and managing a large agency, I think she's been extremely adept. And so I just want to say, for the record and for anyone listening, that, I appreciate her work and her leadership. I mean, and of course, she would probably be the first to say, oh, it's not just all me. And she, her team and the entire team. And that means all of our drivers, all of our operators, all of our mechanics, everybody who works at RTD. Thank you for all your work. And thank you to our General Manager, CEO. So what we're proposing here is really just to go to midpoint. And so, that just means between all of the different numbers that we're entertaining, between the lowest end and the highest end, this is in the middle. And, much as I would prefer to go above the midpoint, this is certainly a strong move. This is a fair move. But I think, our general manager is doing such a great job that I really look forward to, working on making changes for the next year that I think are going to even elevate incentives for her. So that is really one of my main points that I'd like to make. But perhaps if we could hear maybe a little bit more about, obviously I've described it a little bit, this concept of the midpoint, but perhaps Ms. Pelleggi can go into a little bit more detail about that.
Certainly. And thank you, Director Rosenthal. Ms. Pelleggi, do you have any detail to add to that?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair and Director Rosenthal. What I would add is that there is a pay range, and midpoint effectively the compensation philosophy targets at midpoint. And then when you are looking, and we do this in the agency for our non-represented staff when we're bringing them in, you're looking at the years of experience and knowledge. And at midpoint, one would expect that an individual hired at midpoint would be what we often call at job rate, is another term. That means that they are fully capable and expected to perform in that position. They're not new in their role. They understand how to function in their role, but they're also not at the top end where, this is someone who maybe, could do this job in their sleep. I'm not sure who could do their job in their sleep here, because there's a lot of moving parts. But really, midpoint just means it's at job rate. And the expectation is that the performance would, the individual, the incumbent, would be able to perform the expectations that the board would have for them within the job description. The other piece I would say is that it also is something that we use throughout the agency for non-represented staff. And again, the expectation is at midpoint, that's someone that you would typically see who has 5 years of experience in their role. And so certainly GM Johnson has significantly more experience than 5 years leading large organizations or being in very senior C-suite positions.
And for the record, how long has the general manager CEO been general manager CEO of RTD for folks out there who don't know?
So that commenced in November of 2020 is how long she has been as the CEO and general manager and CEO at RTD. And when we are looking from a compensation perspective in the agency, we would also take into consideration experience at prior employers as well. So that also equates. If you were to include that, I wouldn't want to speak for GM and CEO Johnson, but it's definitely well in excess of 5 years.
Thank you. Those are my comments and my questions at this time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Director Rosenthal. I see Director Davidson has his hands raised. If it's all right with you, Director Tisdale, can I call on Director Davidson? Thank you.
Thank you, Committee Chair Catlin, and thank you, Director Tisdale, for the patience. Director Rosenthal, thank you for the question. I just wanted to follow on, and Ms. Pelleggi, thank you for addressing the question and consistency of what's being done within the agency. I just also wanted to highlight that while unrelated to the recommended action at hand, that our compensation philosophy also outlined the targeted midpoint and the intent to pay for performance, which is also in alignment with where the agency is moving. And so I think all that to say, you know, much more work is to be done by this committee to ensure that we have a total look at compensation, that we have a well-structured pay for performance model and good methodology for that. And then that, of course, compounds with or adds to this move itself. So just to highlight that also the factor of midpoint is one component of this, and just wanted to make sure to highlight that point and also put in the call to action for this committee to continue its work along that path. So Director Rosenthal, thank you very, very much for that question. I think it's an important one. And thank you, Committee Chair Catlin. I'll yield the floor back.
Thank you, Board Chair Davidson. Director Tisdale, the floor is yours if you have any comments you'd like to add.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I particularly appreciate the comments by Board Chair Davidson just now, because they really anticipated the comment that I wanted to make for the record, which is that regarding this proposed Sixth Amendment, the only change to the contract is to provide this 1.8% increase to the base salary. And it is appropriate to note that the Performance Committee and others in discussion have had further comments regarding adjustments to the compensation philosophy and, for that matter, to the contract that are not enumerated here and are not addressed. And we have had some significant discussion as to those other items in executive session, so I will not detail any of that further other than to reference the discussion. And just want to note, for the sake of the record, that there are other matters that are being explored and will be discussed in the future, and that this Sixth Amendment is achieving one goal only, and that is to arrive at the midpoint, which I think, for the reasons that have already been articulated at length and beyond my ability to expand upon, I just wanted to make sure we understood that. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Director Tisdale, and for the emphasis on the fact that this is just one item and that there are other items pending in the near future that will come before this committee. Director Well, I wanted to see if Director Guzman wanted another chance to comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have one question, getting to the midpoint, and I know that this is this is maths, that we need to take into consideration that there is a floor and there is a ceiling. The reality that we are paying the salary out of taxpayer funds, so as a fiduciary responsibility, we can't give an exponential amount of increase to pay. Although I do believe in good pay for a good work, right? Honest pay for honest work. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. There are moving bits about pay for performance and what that looks like, what that will be in the future, what that could be in the future, versus uncapped COLA increases, and you know, all of these things that we've been discussing. I want to make sure that we address the fact that this gives room for challenge and growth, and that there is opportunity here to continue increasing the revenue, to Director Rosenthal's earlier point. It's really important. This is a major agency. It's more money than I could ever plan to or hope to earn in a year. This contract is hefty, and well suited for this position because of the amount of work that it takes to do this job. But I think in the context of meeting agency goals, standard operational procedures, and the strategic plan and governmental relations and all of the things that are part of doing the job of general manager and CEO of this agency, have we left ourselves in a position of being able to continue to be competitive, and also recognizing the immense value of the work with the compensation that we're providing. And I'm not sure who that's directed at, but it's kind of a question comment for the group.
No, I appreciate your comments. I saw Director Rosenthal had his hand raised, followed by Chair Davidson. Director Rosenthal, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And one of the things that I know we've discussed in the past, and I'm just want to kind of bring it up again and see what the interface, maybe describe a little bit more, and maybe People Manager Pileggi can talk about a little bit more, which is the Gallagher report. How does that fit into the actions that we're taking today? And maybe how does that continue to guide our actions into the future?
Ms. Pileggi, do you want to try that, or Director Davidson, would you like to take a stab at that?
I'm happy to start us off, and then Ms. Pileggi, if you wouldn't mind filling in a gap, and then I can come back for Director Guzman, your question. Just the Gallagher ultimately made two recommendations, and we took the recommendation of the full market range. There were two recommendations for base salary ranges that's informed this, directly informed this recommended action today. Although we did age the recommended salary band by that employment cost index, which I believe was 4.5% at the time that we aged this band, which was November 2023. As for how it will inform us going forward, I do believe there are some other things for the committee to turn its attention to that were in there. However, I think it would be best practice for this committee to do more and do an additional compensation analysis and study. This is a highly competitive position. This is a highly competitive market. It's a highly dynamic industry, and therefore I believe it is important for us to have a regular recurring compensation analysis. So I do believe there are other things we can look at, Director Rosenthal, with respect to the findings of the Gallagher report. More directly, however, the Gallagher report directly informed this recommended action. But I do believe that the data is aging very quickly, and it is most important for us to continue the compensation analysis process and establish some standard operating procedures around that for this committee. With that, Ms. Pileggi, if I could just open the floor for any gaps that I may have missed there.
Sure, thank you, Chair Davidson. So Board Chair Davidson, I would just add with respect to the Gallagher report. So in the report, there was 2 recommendations for a range. The board has since adopted a range. One of the next steps was for the board to adopt a range. That has since happened. And then subsequent to that, and I'm just referring to the report, the next step was to then actually address where within the range should the general manager and CEO sit. And so that actually was a next action. And then additionally to that, there are other steps within the Gallagher report that the board has actually already taken, i.e. create and implement a compensation philosophy, which is done, establish a range. And then also, and this is important because it leads to or connects into what Director Tisdale was saying without disclosing the conversations in executive committee. There is additional work, which would be how does a general manager and CEO Johnson move through the range? And how will any future general manager and CEO, would it not be Ms. Johnson? So those are the next steps that were comprised within that Gallagher report. And so the board is taking, and this committee, in fact, has taken and is continuing to take those steps. So the immediate next action was to determine where in the band would your GM and CEO reside, and hence this recommendation to go to midpoint. And then subsequent to that, how would you move through an alignment with the compensation philosophy? How would an incumbent move through that band, recognizing respect and financial fiscal constraints and accountability and responsibility?
Thank you for that. Director Davidson, did you have anything to add?
It was in response to Director Guzman's question, so I can hold if there's any further discussion on that last question from Director Rosenthal or anyone.
No, please go ahead in response to Director Guzman's question.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Director Guzman, if I understood your question correctly, is, have we left the room? And that, this does need to grow. And actually, I think Ms. Pelleggi put it very eloquently about the next steps on Gallagher and where we go from here, that there are a number of considerations for how the general manager and CEO moves through the band and what the right mechanisms will be for any performance-based pay, which would be separate action. To directly answer your question, yes, I believe we have left that room. I think that is reflective in the decision to move to midpoint. And I think it is the beauty of the flexible compensation philosophy when we looked at various types of compensation philosophies we could adopt. And again, would thank Ms. Pelleggi for highlighting those, educating this committee on what our options would be. And ultimately for our adoption of the flexible, I thank the committee because it gave us that ability to say we go to midpoint, considering, of course, financial constraints and accountability, as Ms. Pelleggi highlighted, but then also we have additional tools that we can use to stay consistent with our compensation philosophy and have the distance between midpoint and the upper end of the adopted salary range as guideposts as to where we are operating within. So I believe there's plenty of room, and that will conclude my remarks. And I thank you for the question.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. Director Guzman, does that answer your question?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Great. Director Rosenthal has another comment, and then I would like to open it up for comments from other board members who are not on the committee. Director Rosenthal?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for entertaining my questions. This concept of a compensation philosophy, we've heard it kind of mentioned here and there. Maybe, maybe discuss a little bit the genesis of it. When did we sort of decide on it? Talk about it a little bit more, and then more in depth of what are some of the elements of it, some of the particulars, and then also how does that inform our decision today?
Ms. Pelleggi, do you want to take a stab at that? I don't recall the exact dates that this board approved the
September.
Thank you. So the compensation philosophy was approved at the September 26, 2003 board meeting. There were numerous, I want to say at least three separate conversations or meetings with performance committee that got to the place of I went through performance committee on September 11th, and preceding that were a number of meetings to discuss a compensation philosophy. The compensation philosophy in its essence is your guidepost, it's your principles that guide how you will manage compensation. And in this case, it's specific for just the general manager and CEO. Excuse me. It is the committee had discussed a number of different options with respect to compensation philosophies. And as Board Chair Davidson has highlighted, the decision was to go with what was referred to as a flexible compensation philosophy. And flexible here is that it captures the principles, and there's 2, 4, 6, I think there's 9 principles within the compensation philosophy that really put the parameters or the guardrails around how compensation for a general manager and CEO at RTD would be determined. And it is intended to be, those principles are intended to be transparent. So they are publicly available. The board committee, the board itself is aware of those, the current GM and CEO, but also future. When you go out to recruit in future years, this compensation philosophy creates that transparency and openness with potential candidates. And it just serves as the guide. So to just give a quick example, we've already talked about the flexibility where, yes, the philosophy does say to be market competitive aligned at the 50th percentile. But it also has a principle that is respective of needing to ensure the ability and the fiscal responsibility and accountability of the agency. And so that's, for example, where the flexibility would come in. And then it addresses pay for performance, which is actually signaling how an individual, an incumbent, would actually make its way through the band. You're going to hire based on their skills, their experience when they're coming into the position, but the movement is going to be a pay for performance. And that, again, that flexibility signals if you're going to be rewarded with compensation from a performance perspective, it's going to be attached, it's going to be assigned to specific outcomes, it'll be clear and transparent, and only if performance is warranted on that side, pay for performance, that's when compensation would happen. So I'm trying to give a couple examples, but it's really your guardrail. And it just sets the foundation and principles for how the agency will compensate and reward and motivate their general manager and CEO.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pileggi. And I would suggest that as a refresher, we go back to the September meeting packet and take a look at that, because that will be our guidepost going forward in the work of this committee. So I would suggest that. And
Madam Chair, just for the record, it's page 40 of the September board meeting packet.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So I just think that it might be nice to have that on hand as we move through our work on this committee. Now I'd like to open this up to other directors who are not on the committee. If you would please raise your hand if you have a question or comment. Director Ruscia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I personally, excuse me, I personally would be fine with paying mid or above midpoint for the market. But I personally don't believe that what we're looking at here is the market. You know, the Gallagher study did show that our GMCO is paid well above midpoint relative to other comparable transit agencies. But what the board adopted and what Chair Davidson noted is that we adopted the full market range, and that full market range included non-related, non-transit sectors. And even at that, even with that range, our GMCO was still at midpoint last November. But then in addition to giving a COLA, which is part of her contract and she's rightfully entitled to, we also adopted that aging factor. But that aging factor it was also considered in part because of inflation. So that was, again, despite the fact that we also give a COLA. And, one of the things that the Office of the State Auditor recommended in 2010 is that we have a very public discussion that justifies our methodology in determining that midpoint. And I'm not sure that we really did that with the Gallagher study, because what the Gallagher study did was it used the same transit agencies that RTD had used for its internal survey of non-represented employees. And that I think was more staff-led than board-led. And so, I would just encourage, and again, I want to state on the record, I would be fine with the paying above midpoint for the market. I'm not sure that our methodology with all the variables over the years is that market. But what I would encourage the performance committee to consider strongly is also taking the advice of the Office of the State Auditor and using its ability to its authority through the board to hire an independent third-party consultant to help us through this process moving forward, which I think will I think just overall that might have been helpful in the past, but again, this as Director Guzman noted, these are also taxpayer dollars, and we should be able to justify every step of that methodology and our process. This is not to knock the performance committee or anything like that, or the dollar range in front of us, but I am a little bit uncomfortable, and I'm just one director, but I'm a little bit comfortable with how we arrived at what we said was a market. And I mean, to that end, and this is publicly available information, if we do move forward with this contract amendment, that would mean that since the date of hire, our GM CEO will have received over time 27, almost 28% pay increase. And again, some of that might have been because we weren't paying competitively enough, and I'm happy with paying competitively, but I just want us all to bear in mind that these are taxpayer dollars. This is a very important job, obviously, that our general manager has, and we need to be able to justify every step of our decision making. And so I would just encourage the performance committee to, if they don't seek outside counsel on this, at least take a hard look at the methodology that we're using, because per this contract, as I understand it, and also per our own compensation philosophy, we will be evaluating that market every year. And we just want to make sure that those variables are justifiable and that we stay consistent. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Director Ruscia. Chair Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Committee Chair Catlin. Director Ruscia, thank you for your comments. I wanted to just respond directly to some of those, given some of the conversations last year. I just wanted to highlight that certainly one of the most important things that stands out to me, Office of the State Auditor and otherwise from a best practice standpoint, is up until this point, we have been in the complete absence of acting on data. And I think at this point, with the Gallagher report that was produced for and brought to a performance committee and to the board quite some time ago, and is our data on record. I appreciate the comments about methodology, and thank you for highlighting the importance of that. I think your call is well heard, that to this committee, it is absolutely paramount that we well define what our compensation analysis will look like on a go-forward basis, that we establish some consistency in that process and some consistency of services. And as you noted, likely an outside firm that would be assisting and working with this board, and data that would then be adopted by this board. I think that is absolutely critical. I think it belongs as part of the committee work plan, not the topic we're discussing now, but I think it's important to highlight that that is essential and completely hear loud and clear. I also wanted to address that there was a discussion when the Gallagher report was first brought to the performance committee. I may be mistaken on the date. I believe it may have been November 2022, but I would like to double check that. And the discussion was around the different recommendations, one of which was the full market range. That conversation was presented from Gallagher. It was also revisited by the committee last year in our discussion that we believe in the competitive environment that we're in, that we're competing with more than transit agencies. That is a byproduct of opportunities that general managers and CEOs have to move into other opportunities in various sectors. It is also due to the fact that our industry is unique in that it is comprised of some public entities as well as some private entities serving the industry. So I wanted to just directly address those and just refresh some of the comments we had last year and acknowledge your point that we need to be very engaged with methodology in addition to data and output. And certainly I think that's something the committee should do on a go-forward basis. On a look back, this is the data we have, and without taking an action like this, we're acting in the absence of data. So thank you for allowing me to comment, Director Arusha and Chair Catlin, on that matter.
Thank you for those comments, Chair Davidson. I don't see any more hands raised. So at this time, I would like to, well, actually, I would want to make one comment myself, that I did receive a text from Vice Chair Geisinger, and she said she is in support of this motion, even though she cannot vote since she's not here. But I just wanted to let you know that just from her perspective, she said she was supportive of this motion. I'd like to call for the vote. And we have, okay, Director Davidson?
Yes.
Okay, Director Guzman?
Yes.
Director Rosenthal?
Yes.
Director Tisdale?
Yes.
And I am a yes. So for the 5 members who are present, it passes unanimously, and we will take this recommendation forward to the full board. Are there any, there are no discussion items on the agenda this evening, but are there any other matters to discuss?
Does CEO Johnson have anything to say about any of what we just discussed? I'd like to hear from her, if at all possible. Sorry.
Thank you. That's thoughtful. Yes, Director. GM CEO Johnson, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to do so. And Director Guzman, thank you for posing the question relative to me presenting any comments. I would just say that I've heard everything that members have said this evening, recognizing that we all have a fiduciary responsibility in relationship to the position in which I hold. I have been in public service for several years, a couple of decades, and then some. And I would just like to say, relative to all the comments, I understand them clearly. And I also be remiss to state that when I came into this organization, and I've said this to some of you independently, but I'll say it for the record, I came in here in good faith, recognizing that we were in the midst of a global pandemic. I signed a contract in September of 2020 with the absence of a salary structure. And I specifically requested that a compensation analysis be done. We are talking in excess of 3 years plus, and it's come to fruition. I appreciate you all's due diligence and us working collaboratively. There's still more work to be done. And I speak from the vantage point of my colleagues that dedicate their lives to public service. I understand there is an appearance that this is an exorbitant amount of money to some, but when you look at where we are collectively and the work that's entailed, this isn't a 24/7, a 9-to-5 job. Is 24/7, 365 days a year. And factoring that in, I pride myself on being a servant leader because it fills my tank for the betterment of others that weren't born on a level playing field. So while I appreciate everybody's comments, I am a firm believer of equal pay for equal work, and individuals that are members of my team know that I support that. We want to ensure that people have a livable wage, a marketable wage, a competitive wage for the services that they provide for the betterment of the communities that we serve. So with that, thank you for your action.
Thank you, GM CEO Johnson. rest assured that this committee will not let these activities languish for 3 years in the future. And to that point, I do have other matters, and that's the discussion of our work plan. And other committees are ahead of us with their draft work plans. And we will be working with GM CEO Johnson, with Jack Kroll with the board office, with Lynn Geisinger, vice chair of this committee, and with who am I? And hopefully Charlene Polegi, and also Melanie Parrish too. Tishray Parrish, I saw that. Melanie Snyder, as needed to develop a robust work plan that addresses some of these issues that were brought forward tonight. And although our next meeting date is scheduled for Monday, March 18th, I believe that in light of the need to get a good start on this work plan, we may need to schedule a meeting in February. So I would ask for, I would ask for Mr. Kroll to poll the members to see what availability we might have in February. All right, well.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Certainly.
I would like to add for the record and make a request of you and Mr. Kroll that it would be very helpful to ensure that staff had availability when board members are polled, because I believe as we look at performance is collective amongst all parties. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I tried to ensure that I included everybody as a participant, but, and as having input into the process, but I neglected to mention the calendaring of such. So thank you for that reminder. Okay, well, seeing no other discussion, this meeting is adjourned at 7:37 p.m. And I thank you all very much for your good discussion and your hard work on this committee.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good evening.
All right, I'm done.